on my head like my other ones. So each week we're going to have a little bit of a verse that's going to theme us. This one is one I've chosen for today. So the evidence of, for, and by God. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. So the first thing to know is that it says 500 brothers. That's inclusive, ladies, in Greek. It refers to both men and women together. And what I love about this verse is that St. Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 15 the most essential thing. Like, what is he passing on? What is the most critical thing? If you don't remember anything else, remember this. And he's talking about the resurrection. And he just kind of mentions this in passing. It's like, 500 of the people who saw him after the resurrection are still alive. You can go talk to them. And so, not for us, but for them to whom he wrote the letter originally, that meant that 500 people, not one or two or three people who claimed to have seen Jesus, but they all saw him, and you could go down and talk to them. Like, there was this whole community of people who experienced Jesus resurrected. And that's really important for us to remember, because all these years later, it seems like this really distant and crazy thing, and it couldn't have happened. But there were lots of people walking around. Our church isn't 500 people. There were that many people where Jesus was when he was raised from the dead who encountered him after his resurrection. And that's pretty amazing that you could visit something that was the size of a small town and everyone had seen him. And that was just a portion of the population in Jerusalem at the time. Jerusalem was probably about 20,000 at that time, so it's a small percentage of the population. But these are the people who encountered him and were still there and living. There we go. So the evidence that God gives us about him, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, I'm going to tackle it from two angles, creation and the resurrection. So both of these things, and we're just going to go thumbnail today. What I want you guys to understand is that there's a grounding for what we say and believe as the church. A grounding which isn't just because the Bible says it, okay, but is actually grounded in evidence outside the Bible, all right, that helps me believe the Bible, actually. It's going to sound kind of strange. I became a Christian before I believed in the authority of the Bible. Several years. I mean, it took me probably 10 years to get to a place where I was like, yeah, there's really something special about this book. I became a Christian because of the kind of stuff I'm going to share with you in just a thumbnail today. What I did 3 Easters ago, I think, and it's on our webpage. If you go to our webpage, you'll see there's sermon tabs. And some of our sermons are grouped. So this is like our stream. We can group them. We can put in hashtags or whatever, and it kind of groups them together for us, bundles them together. And you'll see our podcast has them this way too. You can listen to all this, the whole season of Easter. I did a series of 8 sermons about the evidence for the resurrection. I tackled one thing each week. So that would give you, if you want to, you can just go listen to them back to back, and it's a nice resource. I'm not going to be able to do that today, obviously. We're just going to tackle real quickly a couple of things. But this is a nice little video that was made by the Colson Center a couple of years ago called Was the Resurrection of Jesus Fake? This is a series they do called What Would You Say? So it's a nice little 3-minute video.
You're in a conversation and someone says, Jesus didn't actually rise from the dead. The resurrection story was fake. What would you say? In the modern era of science and technology, ancient claims involving supernatural, miraculous events can seem a lot more like mythology than history. When an author from antiquity writes about a miraculous experience or observation, we usually assume they're naive, mistaken, delusional, or lying. Many ancient biblical authors seem to see and experience the risen Jesus. And it's difficult to explain these varied group experiences as simultaneous delusions or coincidental errors. Maybe that's why so many skeptics think the disciples of Jesus were simply lying, telling a fake story about the resurrection. But if there's one thing I've learned as a homicide detective, conspiracies of this nature, if they are to be successful, rely on key characteristics and conditions, and none of these critical attributes were present for the disciples of Jesus. So the next time someone says, the story of Jesus' resurrection was faked, here are 3 things to remember. Number 1, the story involved too many people and too much time to be faked. Successful conspiracies require the smallest possible number of co-conspirators circulating the lie for the shortest period of time. It's a lot easier for 2 people to tell a lie and keep a secret than it is for 20. It's also a lot easier to tell a lie and keep a secret for a day than it is for a year. There were simply too many eyewitnesses of the risen Christ. Luke identifies 120 in Acts, and Paul identifies over 500 in 1 Corinthians. In addition, these witnesses faithfully communicated what they saw for nearly 60 years without flinching or changing their story. If the story of Jesus was faked, it would have been exposed easily given the number of people making the claims for nearly 6 decades. Number 2. The relationships of the disciples were too distant for the story to be faked. Successful conspiracies require excellent communication. Everyone participating in the conspiracy needs to tell the same story, and that's hard to do unless they can communicate regularly. That's why, as detectives, the first thing we do when interviewing multiple suspects is separate them. Successful conspiracies also benefit from strong familial relationships. Conspirators are far less likely to rat out fellow family members. The disciples didn't have the benefit of excellent communication or overarching family relationships. The 12 apostles, for example, were separated by thousands of miles without the ability to communicate with each other. They couldn't coordinate lies, quote unquote, or disprove a false claim that one of them might have recanted in a faraway land. While a few of the apostles were related, most were not. And Matthew, the writer of one of the earliest Gospels, wasn't even liked by the other disciples when he first joined the group. If the story of Jesus was fake, it would have been easily exposed given the geographic and relational distance of the disciples. Number 3. The motives of the disciples were too weak for the story to be faked. Successful conspiracies are motivated conspiracies. Detectives learn quickly that there are only 3 reasons why anyone tells a lie: financial greed, sexual lust, and the pursuit of power. People who lie, or commit any crime for that matter, only do so for one of those 3 reasons. If the alleged eyewitnesses of the resurrection, all 500 plus of them, were lying, what was their motivation? None of them got rich from the lie. None collected girlfriends, and none even had the power to prevent their own martyrdom. Instead, the early eyewitnesses of the resurrection only suffered for their claims. Most were martyred. Many were persecuted. Others were ostracized. Yet they held to their claims with unwavering determination, all without any motive to lie. If the story of Jesus was faked, it would have been exposed easily once the pressure was applied against a group that had little or nothing to gain. So the next time you're sharing the truth of Christianity and someone says, Jesus wasn't actually resurrected from the dead, that story was faked, remember these 3 things. Number 1, the story involved too many people and too much time to be faked. Number 2, the relationships of the disciples were too distant for the story to be faked. And number 3, the motives of the disciples were too weak for the story to be faked. But what would you say? I'm Detective J. Warner Wallace.
He is a really interesting guy. Like many apologists, he set out to disprove Christianity and ended up becoming a Christian. His YouTube channel, if you like this kind of stuff, is a wealth of great material. I mean, hundreds of hours of material that he's assembled by teaching college classes, getting into hostile college environments and letting them throw their best questions at him and stuff. So great material. This guy is again Stephen Meyer. He works with the Discovery Institute. I think he's the chairperson now. He's a scientist and a philosopher of science. I think his area of specialty is the biological sciences. Speaking last year at the Dallas Conference on Science and Faith, which was last fall, he identified 3 reasons among young people that they don't believe in God. He didn't identify it. Actually, a big study did. One of the biggest scientific studies that's ever been done did that. So these are the top 3 they came up with. Science has disproven or made irrelevant the existence of God. There's no evidence for God. And why do bad things happen to good people, or the problem of evil? This is the oldest one. My daughter wrote a paper on one of the Greek philosophers who was asking this question 400 years before Jesus came along. So this is not a new question that is out there. This is what my theology professor in seminary called a 3-beer discussion, so it's not one we're going to tackle this morning. It's probably one we can get into over a couple of days. If we ever want to do a class on that, we could have a good discussion time. And I say class, it's not like I'll be teaching. I would do that more like a round table, like let's have a discussion kind of thing, although I certainly have some knowledge of the questions that have been asked over the years. We're going to look at these two today a little bit. But before we do, I'm going to introduce you to Rich. Rich was in last spring's new member class?
Yes.
Yeah. And being enterprising, we elected him council president. We don't expect that of new members, just so you know. Rich was very active at his previous church, came to our church, and he's just got a brilliant administrative mind, and so we're like, dude, what a job. And actually, he got elected by the council. First, he got elected to council, and then the council elected him president this year. So he's helping us. So I wanted to introduce you, and Rich, tell me about yourself. And
Well, I was a life member at my former church. It was very hard to leave, but things were going a little too much the wrong way, too much to the other side of the world, like it is today, so to the left, and I wasn't getting anything out of any of the services anymore. And then COVID came, it closed, and they had online, but it was only on Zoom. You couldn't record. Tried to talk to that pastor and say other churches I can whenever I want because I can pull it up on YouTube or on Facebook. No, don't want to do that. And if you happen to get there late, only she would permit you to sign into Zoom. No one else could do that. So if you were a little late, you didn't go to church that day. So that was the final straw that said we need to look elsewhere. And our neighbors had found Holy Cross and invited us, and we came up here. And the first week, stepped in the door, and before the service started, I knew this was where I wanted to be. And couldn't have been a better decision. And the word is preached here and taught. And I think I said either to Pastor or to Michael, I said, after sitting through the church service and listening to the sermon, it's like going back to Sunday school again, because I was learning stuff and being refreshed of things that I were never touched on in how many years. So every week it's a learning experience for me when I sit in church, and there's so much to get involved in here. So many different. Pastor asked when we sat with them, would we like to be involved in anything? And there's the Bath Food Bank. I'm retired, and my wife's retired, so we're home during the day. So we got involved with the Bath Food Bank. So we worked there 3 days a month, and that food bank works a little different. Most food banks, they come and they get to shop and pick the food they want. This one, we pack it up. Everybody gets the same thing. They have like a storeroom, and it's all on shelves, all the different food, and they have a shopping list, and they go around and put it into one of those mail tubs, if you've ever seen those white plastic mail tubs, and then that fits into 2 grocery bags. And then we have volunteers that come and pack it on a Friday, and then the following Tuesday we hand it out. And since COVID, there's so many old people that some of them shouldn't be driving, in my opinion, but they come, and I couldn't envision them coming in and shopping, and then we have to run out and put it in their cars anyway, because they couldn't carry them, the bags. So we put it right into their cars. They pull up, and last week there was one family that I got to know. We've been doing it, well, almost 2 years, I guess. And one family that was a 3-generation family. The grandfather came and picked up the food. And if they have children, if they have up to 3 children, they get an extra bag of food of more kid-friendly cereal and snacks and different things. So he was getting 2 children's bags, so there was more than 4 kids there, and 2 bags of groceries. And because it was such a huge family, they gave, like, we collect for the food bank. So somebody this month there was a big can of hot chocolate mix about this big and round and about this high. So they always had an extra box of food of any of those big items that we gave to that family. Well, he passed away in January, and his wife came this week, and they also, because of their low income, got an extra box of food from Second Harvest. So that food wasn't delivered this week yet when she came through, so she parked, and when it came, then I took it over to her, and she got out and opened the door for me to put it in, and I offered my condolences on the passing of her husband, and we talked a little bit, and it ended up that she was crying, and I was holding her and hugging her, and we spent some time together, and then she said, I have to live long enough to raise my other 3 grandchildren. I raised 9. And that's the kind of people that we're serving there. And it as much as it hurts, and I was tearing up and tears were rolling down my face, I was glad to be there that I'm helping. And there's other people that are not as bad off as that, but it's been very rewarding to be able to help in that ministry. And there's lots of other things here that it's rewarding to help in. So you're at the right place, believe me.
You've seen that on the on the things hanging in the hanging in the sanctuary. We have our kind of 5 core practices of discipleship there, and the biggest one of them is service, because that keeps it real. It's not just a head game, and I mean, coming to church keeps it real too, because you're receiving, like we did today, the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus, and we've got prayer. The fellowship we have around table. You heard Deacon Michael telling you that this Tuesday night, I guess you guys are having a party, aren't you, for the 1 year Bible? Are you all bringing food?
Yes, we're
They did that. They committed a year ago, and they got through it. Probably that group stayed pretty strong. What, 20,
right
25,
around
26 or something?
20, and a couple, weren't coming, but they were online and we had one person online. I think it's a former member that's out near Harrisburg.
Oh yeah,
Doug.
Yeah, Doug Sharf. Yeah,
and he's there every week, and sometimes he's got questions. So it's not just us in the room; it's others. And then, the Cuckers, they traveled out to Arizona for the winter for a few months with their son, and they were on weekly as well. So there's usually 20 of us sitting around the table, and then there's probably close to 10 online some weeks. Some weeks we were there for a while when the weather was nice. We were getting 28 around the table.
Yeah.
And the table had to expand a couple weeks. But it's getting such a deep understanding from the Bible and adding each other's experiences and stuff.
And we're really blessed. Deacon Michael and I work well together because we have different strengths. His strength is Bible. I know that he trained in a thing called the Bethel series 30, 40 years ago. He's got over 300 Bible verses committed to memory. He's taught his way through that class. It's a 2-year class. He's taught the class at least 15 times over the years. So his strength is Bible. I know the Bible, but not like to quote it as well as he does. He could put those pieces together for you guys really good. My specialty is what they call systematic theology, so I can connect the pieces theologically and apologetics. So between the two of us, you're getting a pretty complete opportunity to grow in your faith here, which is cool. It's really cool that we've been able to do that together.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Since you finished up for the Bible in a year, what's the continuation then? Because I'd like to go.
Okay.
Mhm.
Come Tuesday night if you can, 6:30.
Yeah.
The food will be good. I know they're doing a covered dish.
Yeah. It might just be fattening food, but it is Fat Tuesday.
It is Fat Tuesday. That's right.
So
It's
it's
time.
a time to come. We're going to start with Luther's Large Catechism
Okay.
and go through the catechism. And what's really great for me is when I was growing up as a teenager, we didn't have a pastor, and the 5 or 6 of us at our church, we went to this other church nearby, and we had catechism there for a while. And then we got a vice pastor from a different church, so then we had him for a while, but then he left, and then we had a different pastor for a while. I didn't really get a whole heck of a lot out of my catechism classes. I knew everything. I grew up in the church. It wasn't that. I went to Sunday school every week, but what I'm learning now is just much deeper than probably what I should have learned some of it as a teenager. And so this will be great. And it was by, he passed a sheet around. What 3 things do you want to look at next? And people filled it out, and Luther's Large Catechism
Was
came
the top
out
vote getter.
as the top vote getter. And it's and like Pastor said about Michael, somebody asked a question last week about the 1-year Bible. You read an Old Testament lesson, a New Testament lesson, a Psalm, and a proverb every week, and you work through the Bible that way. So we were in Exodus, and there were some questions about Exodus, and the question was asked, and he said, "Well, turn to," and it was, I don't remember. It might have been First Peter. I didn't ask that. I asked about Exodus, and it's because what's in the Old Testament is, I'm going to say, hopefully I can say that, is revealed in the New Testament. That's the right way.
Yeah.
And
The New Testament is concealed in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is revealed in the New Testament.
And it's true because he knows all these Bible verses, he can go right to the verse, and you just open the Bible and go to that verse, and it's confirmed. It one refers to the other, and that's the learning part that really enriches your faith. And that last number 3, bad things happen to good people. It truly does, but what you got to do is look for the good that's going to come. Because my son died at 32. I had no grandchildren. My other son and daughter-in-law couldn't have children. But then with the insurance money, they've given us 3 children because of in vitro fertilization. And the first child was $30,000 in drugs. It's very expensive. And so there is good things coming out of bad things. You just have to wait and look for it. And there's many other things. And if you look at your own life, something bad can happen, but you can look ahead if you're put that positive thought in your head, and if you trust the Lord, the good will be there. And it strengthens your faith even more.
Thanks. And my Bible studies are kind of the opposite of Deacon Michael's. Deacon Michael is really good at hopping all over the Bible at one time. My Bible studies go really slow and really deep on one text at a time. So it took us 3 years to get through the book of Luke, 2 years to get through the book of Acts, and now it's taken us 3 months to get up to chapter 4 in Genesis. So we go slow, and we really dig on those things. And we're kind of, one of the reasons why is that the class asks any questions they want, and because we don't have to go to the readings for next week, we can just, some weeks we get one verse, and that's all we have time to talk about. But it's their questions, and then we go on from there. So the two kind of complement each other.
And I've got to make my time available to get here for that, because that's the Bible study I was used to before.
Okay. Yeah, it's a nice thing is we do stream everything online now. That's taken us a while to get there, but provided we don't have a technological failure any given class, we stream everything. So it's all on our website, and we're working on curating it so that it's in playlists now, so you can find what you need easily. Okay, so thank you, Rich. You're welcome to stay if you want, but you've probably seen some of this before in your member class. So.
Yeah, I did.
So one of the we're not going to, like I said, we're not going to go in deep on this stuff today. In fact, we may only get to the first part, creation, because I want to get you guys out on time. I like to honor science has disproven it. I'm going to skip this stuff just for time's sake. So this top one here, that science has disproven or made irrelevant the existence of God. This has been one of the more exciting developments in the course of my life. Now, I knew by the time I became a Christian at age 25 that there were a lot of scientists who were Christian. Okay. I didn't. What's happened in the years since I became a Christian in 1995 has been that science has more and more not just confirmed what we believe as Christians, but has pointed the way back to Christianity for people who weren't even looking for it, which is really amazing. Like I said, and this is going to involve the creation piece of that stained glass window I skipped by quickly, God the Father. So I used this with the kids a couple weeks ago. This is somebody's computer simulation of the Big Bang. Most everyone knows that the Big Bang is a standard textbook, right? I mean, this is like science. This is no one really debates this anymore. Okay, so that was the background radiation that pointed the way to the Big Bang, and start measure. I took a 300 level astronomy class when I was in college. You actually can, by looking at the wavelengths of light, you can see like how far the spectrum is shifted to the red or the blue. If it's shifted towards the blue, it means the star is approaching you. So it's like when you hear a siren go by, it goes meow, like that, right? It's doing that because it's compressing the wave on one side and it's stretching the wave on the other. Light works the exact same way, but it's moving at such speeds we can't like fathom it. But when you're moving at the speed of the universe, it actually makes a difference. So you can that effect, that sound I just made, you can measure it. So redshift means the star is moving away from you, and blue shift means it's moving towards you. And you can measure how far the spectrum is. You can tell how fast the star is moving towards you or away from you. So as they were starting to notice that this redshift and blue shift was happening, as they were examining these stars and obviously, galaxies and things like this, they also started to discover this thing called background radiation. And it was a remnant of this giant explosion once upon a time. So scientists were getting together thinking about this, and they came up with this theory we call the Big Bang. The funny thing about the Big Bang theory is that the people who opposed it most at the beginning were scientists. Because it said that everything in creation used to not exist and suddenly appeared at one time. And I wish I could remember the name of the two scientists. That's skipping my brain right now. But as they walked around Vienna late one night, one of them goes, "Did we just prove the existence of God?" Because they thought science worked the other way. They thought science was opposed to religious faith, because that was the story of the Enlightenment. And they were really not sure they wanted to release the theory, because it would give aid and succor to religious people, especially Christian and Jewish religious people, because it's our creation story says at the beginning there's nothing. And I want to show you this little clip from a movie called The Privileged Planet. I'm going to apologize. It's a little grainy because it's an older documentary, and some of the information in it is outdated, and I'll tell you what it is when we get to the end of it. This is just a really short excerpt of an hour-long documentary. But it's named for a book by a guy named Gonzalez, who got himself fired from the Smithsonian for writing this book called The Privileged Planet. And basically, he was looking at the scientific evidence and saying, it looks like life shouldn't exist anywhere in the universe. And the fact that we exist is crazy. And not only the fact that we exist, but the fact that we seem to be perfectly positioned to explore the universe and learn about science. So that stuff I was just telling you about with redshift and blue shift with the stars, if our sun and our moon weren't exactly the size they are and exactly the distance they are from us, we wouldn't know any of that stuff. Because the only reason we can measure light that way is because during a complete full solar eclipse, we can only see the corona of the sun. And that happens because the moon is 40 times smaller than the sun, but looks 40 times closer to us. Like the magnitude is exactly the same, so that when our moon covers the sun during a solar eclipse, they're exactly the same size. If our moon was too big, we wouldn't see the Coriolis, so we wouldn't be able to get the measurements we need for the stars. And vice versa, if the sun was any bigger, there'd be too much light for us to measure that same thing. So that's what this guy's it's just a book. He's just like, hey, it just seems like it's a little weird that we're in this really hostile universe. We exist, and we're perfectly positioned to be able to learn. And he goes, and obviously it's book long, so it's a lot more evidence than I'm giving you right now. So he wrote this book, got fired from the Smithsonian for it, and they did this documentary as a result. He is employed someplace, and I can't remember where. He is a scientist, and he's a respected scientist, but they didn't like that book. This is just a little excerpt from his.
For centuries, the fact that we can discover things about the universe has really been something of a mystery. Why would beings like ourselves be able to discover a universe like this? Why is what we think about the universe, why would it correspond to the way things really are?
Our ability to discern and understand the universe is a fundamental part of what makes the universe tick, so that we're linked into it. This isn't just a sort of an accident, trivial little byproduct. It is something that is linked to the great cosmic scheme of things. Now, I have no idea how that linkage works, why it's there, or anything of that sort.
The spectacular progress of modern astronomy and physics is the product of a universe accessible to the human eye and mind. It is a universe governed by laws and forces that literally hold our planet Earth and the entire cosmos together, and are finely calibrated to allow for both complex life and scientific discovery.
If you didn't have something like gravity that hold matter together, you would never get planets, you wouldn't get stars, you wouldn't get any complex organisms. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, there would be nothing to hold protons and neutrons together in the nucleus. And so you wouldn't have any atoms, so no chemistry. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, you would have no bonding between chemicals. You'd have no life have to be in place in order for life to occur. Wipe out one of those principles, wipe out one of those laws. No life.
During the past 40 years, scientists have determined the relative strengths of each of these primary laws and forces. These strengths are so critically balanced, they are often described as being finely tuned.
If you're to take the basic fundamental constants of nature and you were to change these even slightly, or you were to pick their values at random, you would almost never get a universe that would be habitable in any sort of way. That is, you couldn't have galaxies, you couldn't have planets, you couldn't have complex biological organisms if these fundamental constants were even slightly different, slightly stronger, slightly weaker than they actually are in this universe. That's the idea of fine-tuning.
To better appreciate this concept, imagine a machine able to control the strengths of each of the physical constants. If you changed, even slightly from its current setting, the strength of any one of these fundamental forces, such as gravity, the impact on complex life would be catastrophic.
If you increased it by a little bit, no large-scale life forms could exist. Anything that was more than the size of a pea would be completely crushed. So you might be able to get life of a very, very primitive sort, such as bacteria, but you could never get conscious observers.
Now, this is one of a long list of properties in underlying physics that seem to be prerequisites for a universe with life. For example, the strengths of the other forces are all important, the masses of the various subatomic particles. If all of these things were even a little bit different, then life, certainly life as we know it, could not exist.
These forces and constants are another example of the correlation between life and discovery. For not only are they finely tuned for our existence, they can also be understood.
It's remarkable how well the laws work. And not only that, it's remarkable how simple they are. And that also is related to the discoverability of the laws.
Albert Einstein wrote, "I have deep faith that the principles of the universe will be both beautiful and simple."
Like I said, it's an hour-long documentary. What's amazing to me is that here's what's out of date about that documentary. It's about 15 years old now. You can get it from Illustra Media. I have a copy in my office. If you want to borrow it, you're welcome to. At the time they did this documentary, they'd identified about 20 of those things, like proton mass and speed of light and all this kind of stuff. What's changed is that now they've identified over 80. That if they tweak it by a tiny amount, 1/1,000,000th of a percentage point in some cases, the universe doesn't work. Everything falls apart. So that's just from physics standpoint. Biology's gotten even more interesting in our lifetime. Some of the top minds in biology now are saying that the theory that was called neo-Darwinian evolution, the theory that most scientists textbooks teach in our schools, both college and high school, can't work mathematically. So you're getting top flight scientists going, what we've been teaching for 150 years as settled science, there's no possible way it can work. And they're showing it mathematically, not because they don't like it. This is not some crazy, preacher saying, I don't like this thing. This is science pointing that a weakness in science. So, and some of the things coming out of biology are, again, pointing back to the idea of a creator. If you've got creation, you've got a creator, and that's a different thing. If you've heard the multiverse theory, that's because if you have infinite number of universes, statistically one of them will show up that will support life. That's the idea there. The problem is that in that theory, you've got some sort of cosmic machine cranking out universes. That machine has to be more complex than the universes that it's cranking out. So all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. You're not solving your scientific problem. So all of these things point back to the role of a creator, which is what is behind Genesis, okay? Which is what's behind the scriptural story. The scriptures are not about how we got the world. The Christian and Jewish scriptures are about who made the world. And the focus is the who, not the how. Okay, and that makes it different than almost every other religion in ancient history. All the religions that were coming around at that point, all their creation stories tell you how we got the world we got. Our story tells us who created the world we got. It's a very, very different kind of story. So we're at noon. I want to let you guys go on time. So, like I said, next week we will have someone else here, but I really think you'll like Jerry. He is a super salt of the earth guy, and he's going to have a good talk with you guys, and probably have more of a discussion with you and hear what's going on in your lives. And then in 2 weeks I'll be back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the evidence surrounding the resurrection. I've got tons more material. If any of this stuff is of interest to you, I will point you in the right direction on all these things. This is what I'm getting my doctorate in, so it's an area I'm interested in. But I try not to make it like because I'm interested in it, everybody's interested in it. There's a reason why we believe what we believe, and as much a journey that I had to take emotionally and intellectually get there. And this was part of that journey. So hopefully this will be. Hopefully I can be a resource to you, and by that spiritual growth, help you have a better life. I mean, that's really what it's about, and make you a blessing to the people around you. Anybody have any questions? Like I said, that was a real thumbnail. It was like quick and dirty, but no. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys.